Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Supporting Children of Incarcerated Parents Fostering Collaborative Support Systems. I'm thrilled that we all could come together during Second Chance Month for the third and final part of the Supporting Children of Incarcerated Parents webinar series. Each of these series have discussed ways in which children affected by parental incarceration can and should be supported. My name is Tiana Smith, and I'm a Senior Policy Analyst at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. I want to thank you all for attending. This webinar will be recorded. Today, we'll be hearing from Allison Houlihan, Director of the New York Initiatives for Children of Incarcerated Parents, Osborne Association, and Diane Wallace Booker, Chief Executive Officer from U.S. Dream Academy, on efforts they are making to support children of incarcerated parents. Please utilize the Q&A chat option to enter questions you may have throughout the presentation. At the end of the presentation, we will hold a Q&A session. The Council of State Governments Justice Center The Council of State Governments Justice Center. We are a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that combines the power of membership association serving state officials in all three branches of government, with policy, research, expertise to develop strategies that increase public safety and strengthen communities. Now I'll turn the presentation over to Allison Houlihan.
Thank you, Tiana. I am really thrilled to be here today and to co-present alongside Diane and Tiana, two wonderful partners. As Tiana said, I coordinate the New York Initiative for Children of Incarcerated Parents, which is all about partnerships. We launched NYSIP in 2006. NYSIP is short for New York Initiative for Children of Incarcerated Parents, to really bring together people from all walks of life to figure out how we can best collaborate and partner to support children of incarcerated parents in all types of settings. The partnership is comprised of over 60 partners, folks that work in city and state government agencies, community-based organizations, families, adult children of incarcerated parents, currently and formerly incarcerated parents. I'll talk a little bit about the work that families and those who are currently incarcerated do to advise and inform our partnerships. And we come together, we meet pretty regularly, about 4 or 5 times a year, to strategize about how best to support children. And one of the systems that we focus on quite often is the educational system. And so I'm really excited to share some of our successes and challenges, and hopefully to spark and inspire some of you to collaborate with your education systems to better support children of incarcerated parents. And as part of our work with NYSIP, we've also launched SIA Support Us, which I'm hopeful that some of you are aware of. And SIA Support Us is more of a national partnership. U.S. Dream Academy and Diane Wallace Booker are part of that partnership, which we're really grateful for, and many other organizations, those who are directly affected by parental incarceration. We really come together to provide a community for young people who experience parental incarceration, as well as to provide resources and support and to identify steps that people can take nationally and in their local communities to better support children of incarcerated parents. A couple of years ago, well, I guess it's been about 4 years ago now, we focused on supporting children's educational success and well-being during October's SIA Support Us Month. We have a theme every year. And the young people that are part of our SIA Support Us youth team really inform our messaging and inform our policy recommendations. And so I really wanted to start today with bringing their voices into the room and sharing with you all what their recommendations are for how best to support them in educational settings. And I think that the recommendations also apply to any setting that children and families are in. So I'll turn it over to Tiana to press play on the video.
As children of incarcerated parents, we are often asked about our parents' incarceration.
9 times out of 10, we are approached wrong and become uncomfortable.
Here are tips from our first-hand experience.
Do not put us on the spot or in an uncomfortable situation. Instead, avoid re-traumatization by picking up on our body language and cues that show we do not want to talk about it.
Do not ask why my parent is incarcerated or how long they'll be there. Instead, understand that it is not easy to talk about. Give me my privacy.
Do not treat me differently because of my parents' experience. Instead, treat me the same as my peers and believe in my ability to achieve greatness just as everyone else.
Do not try to relate to my experience. My experience is my own. If I feel comfortable enough to say, yeah, my dad is in jail right now, don't reply with, oh, I feel that. My parents are divorced, so I don't see my dad that often either. Instead, listen, offer me programs and resources, or don't try to relate at all.
Do not minimize my experience. Instead, ask me how I'm feeling and understand that my feelings are valid.
Do not ask questions like, are you afraid to become incarcerated like your parent? Instead, reassure us that we are our own person. Give us positive affirmations.
Do not use words like criminal or felon. Instead, be mindful of your language and replace it with incarcerated person or justice involved individuals.
For more information on how to support children of incarcerated parents, join the CS Support Us network and follow us on social media. And remember,
CS Support Us, join Susu.
So amazing to see these young leaders. This was obviously from 2020 and they're so grown now. It's so cute to see them at a younger age. So the New York Initiative for Children of Incarcerated Parents really follows the Children of Incarcerated Parents Bill of Rights as a roadmap to all of the policy, practice, and advocacy that we do. So for those of you that are kind of looking for where do I begin, where do I start, what am I partnering about, I advise you all to take a look at the Children of Incarcerated Bill of Rights so that you can really hear from the young people who created them themselves about what they need. Next slide, please. So we're all here today for the most part because we're working in educational settings and we're working with young people who are going to schools. And so if those of you who watched some of the other webinars in this series know some of this already, but I wanted to touch on the fact that one of the challenges for students is that there's research that has shown that teachers may have lower expectations when they learn that a student has an incarcerated parent. Some of the behavioral school readiness can be compromised when children are dealing with the trauma of separation, the ambiguous loss of their parent, which may result in some developmental delays, attention and deficit disorders. And then a big thing is the stigma and shame that they're experiencing, which I think is where a lot of the work that we've done in New York with schools really revolves around the kind of social and emotional support and lessening that stigma and shame. Next slide, please. So we partner with schools, and that's not necessarily, it's easier said than done, right? So how do you partner with schools? If you're already working in a school, I would recommend that you start kind of talking to your colleagues and see if others might be interested in figuring out how best to support students who experience parental incarceration. It's really important to garner buy-in from the top down, right? So working with the principal, the superintendent, you might even want to work with the whole school system. We are based in New York City, and so we worked with the New York City Department of Education in a variety of ways to roll out some supports to better ensure that all staff, not just the social workers, not just the counselors, but all staff, including the people who work in the lunchroom, the people who might be doing security at the school, to better understand the experience that children are going through. What we've found when we've looked for these allies and partners in schools is that oftentimes there are people in the schools that are jumping at the chance to come together and figure out how best to support students. And when they come to the table and through conversations, it often comes out that many of them have experienced parental incarceration themselves when they were younger, but it's not something that they talk about because of the stigma related to the issue. Others may have an incarcerated loved one currently or formerly. And so oftentimes you'll find some natural allies to connect with. So I recommend to start having some conversations. And then you can work together together to look at what you can do. And I'm going to kind of dive into a little bit further about these, but some top line things are really working with the school or the whole school system to develop a guiding memo for school staff to know what to do when a family comes to them and say they would like for the incarcerated parent to be involved in educational planning, or perhaps that incarcerated parent sends a letter and asks to be involved in an IEP meeting or to participate in parent-teacher conferences and to receive report cards. But oftentimes the people that open the letter or the school staff, they just don't know what to do and they need guidance. So that is definitely a good place to start, is to figure out what to do to make sure the incarcerated parent is engaged when that's what the student and family wants. Here you'll see on this slide some handwritten notes. We actually are advised by currently incarcerated parents, and these were some notes and suggestions that they had sent us with their ideas for what schools could do to better support students and to ensure that parents were engaged. We actually will take in school administrators and principals to some of the prisons to meet with currently incarcerated parents to hear their ideas for how their students or how their children can be supported and how they can be a resource to support their children in meeting their educational goals. And in doing so, it really is an opportunity to make sure that the children are seen and supported, and then their parents, who often have information that their caregivers in the community may not, especially if it's a student who has been being evaluated for an IEP. That incarcerated parent may have the information that is really critical. We're going to talk a little bit about creating affirming spaces and some resources, and also how to collect data on children. I think that often comes up. Next slide, please. So how do we learn that a student even has an incarcerated parent, right? How do we support children? We don't support children unless we know who they are. And this is kind of a challenge because we don't know what will happen with that information. The family may not know, well, why am I being asked? Families are often fearful of being judged. They're fearful of being referred to child welfare systems. So it's really important to ask in order to give support. Next slide. So we recommend saying, if you or a friend has a family member who's been in prison or jail, please let us know how we can support you. We have supportive resources, because this way you are asking to give. And I really want to bring up Ann Adelis Estrin, a mentor to many of us in this space. That was her recommendation, is always to ask to give, not just to simply ask. You can also put up signs like this one. This poster was created by Mason, who had an incarcerated father, and he won the Susu art contest. And he created this so that young people could see that, oh, this person might be supportive. I'm going to go to them and ask for some supports. We want to be really mindful about not necessarily identifying a list of students who have an incarcerated parent or putting it on their record, simply because teachers and school staff need the training and support to understand how to support these students. And that doesn't happen in most schools and in most educational schools. And so oftentimes we hear from educators and even social workers and counselors that they don't have the language, they don't have the resources, they're not really sure how to respond. For some of them, they may also have an incarcerated loved one, and it might hit too hard, too close to home to them. And so they get uncomfortable when the conversations are brought up. So we recommend a different approach. We recommend to create spaces to signal to students that there are resources for them, to identify a few key point people in the school who have the language and the resources and the competency to be able to have these sensitive conversations with children, because we want children to be able to disclose and be met with support, and we don't want them to disclose and be met with somebody who's uncomfortable or starts to fumble their words. And we've even heard this, say to that student, don't talk about that here. And that's from a protective space, because they want the student to be protected from bullying, but then that just reinforces the students that they shouldn't talk about incarceration. Next slide, please. So I do want to emphasize that the majority of children of incarcerated parents do not become incarcerated themselves, and with supports, they will thrive and succeed. And that's a false narrative that we often hear in the media, that children are more prone to follow in their parents' footsteps to a life of incarceration and involvement with the criminal justice system. The likelihood of that is slightly elevated, but it's not as large as most people assume. Next slide, please. So how do we reduce this stigma? A lot of it comes down to staff training, for staff just kind of really understanding the experiences of children, to understand the stigmas that they're facing from other students and the bullying. We also encourage people to just take a moment to self-reflect about their own biases that they might have around who's incarcerated and what that means for family members of the incarcerated. Some people may have been victims of crimes themselves, and so talking about crime and incarceration can be triggering, and we have to honor that. That's understandable. So just make sure you understand where you stand on things, and hold that, so that when a student comes forward, you're able to be as most open and supportive as possible. And then you also want to be able to develop relationships with community-based partners who might be able to provide that additional support and resources to families. Because while children spend most of their time in schools, we know that teachers they're stretched thin, and they aren't expertise in every issue that impacts a family, which is why it's critical to look to see if there are organizations like the Osborne Association or mentoring programs like U.S. Dream Academy in your communities. We recognize, though, that there aren't all those resources in every community, and so I encourage you all to go to the CS Support Us website, because there are a lot of resources for educators there. Next slide, please. So creating affirming spaces, we recommend hanging the Children of Incarcerated Parents Bill of Rights, putting books about children of incarcerated parents. There are a bunch of them in libraries and classrooms, to talk about the history of incarceration in this country and how it affects families. In curriculum, 1 in 2 people in this country have had a close family member that has been incarcerated. So it's something that affects so many of us, but something we often don't talk about it. But make sure before you put up these bat signals to students, that there are identified point people in the school that the students can be referred to, because you don't want to encourage students to talk about this issue and not be prepared to support them. Next slide, please. Also want to think about just using language that isn't upsetting and triggering for students. So when you're talking about people who are incarcerated, think about how the children are hearing some words that we are commonly using, such as offender or felon, because to that student, that child, that's just their mom or dad. Next slide, please. Including incarcerated parents in educational planning. It is possible. We do it in New York State. It is possible to partner with a jail or the state prison system to try and set up that line of communication where parents can teleconference in. So if that's something that you're interested in, I recommend that you try and look for a community-based organization that has programming in your local jail or has programming in a prison, to talk with them about who you might speak with at the prison system to try and set up a line of communication. And I also want to flag that the FERPA allows that parents do have access to their children's school records. So you do want to work with the student and the family and the community to make sure that they're okay with you sending any educational records to an incarcerated parent before doing so. But it is possible, and we're doing it in New York quite often. Next slide, please. And most importantly, nothing about us without us. I try to ground us today with starting off by hearing directly from the youth. So if you're looking to roll something out in your community or in your school, talk to young people who've experienced parental incarceration. Ask them what their ideas are. Ask them what their needs are. With SIA Support Us, our national initiative, and the youth that were at the top of this presentation are members of the SIA Support Us youth team, and they inform all of the messaging. We have a youth action council at Osborne, and we have other children in various programs at the Osborne Association, and we're always tapping them and asking them, what do you need to be supported? What would you do if you had a magic wand? What system change would you make? And they come up with really amazing recommendations. If you go to the SUSU website, you will see the youth listening session, which is a recommendation for educators developed by young people who came together to talk with educators and others about how best to support them in educational settings from early childhood through college. We also had a call to action in New York in 2010, where we brought together young people and folks from city and state government agencies to talk about some systems changes that were necessary to better support children and families involved with the criminal justice system. Next slide, please. So peer support is really empowering. We think that it's an opportunity for young people to come together and just to like not have that stigma hanging around them because they're with other young people that have also experienced parental incarceration. So it's a really good opportunity to be able to bring young people together, to have fun, to also maybe reach some goals that they may have around their educational career readiness, college readiness. We bring young people together to learn independent living skills, and here they are having fun learning some music. So it's an opportunity to be in that space without having to worry about the stigma. And then throughout the year, then we dose in opportunities for them to kind of really think through about how they're feeling about having an incarcerated parent, to do some activities to help them heal and repair from that separation and loss. Next slide, please. Here's some more youth. It's really important to ask for youth input. Compensate youth for coming to programs after school hours is really critical. You want to make sure that you're getting feedback from them and that you're measuring program impact. Next slide, please. Youth Experience Success. This is one of Osborne's programs for 13 to 15-year-olds that really focuses on that peer support and youth leadership development, independent living skills. Next slide, please. Here's them doing fun activities. Next slide. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to zip through these. Youth Action Council is our advocacy group for older teens that are 15 to 18. They pick an issue that they would like to advocate for, and then they go and they meet with lawmakers. They do public education and outreach, write op-eds, host podcasts. They've been really successful in New York State and passing some really critical laws to make sure that they have access to their incarcerated parents. Next slide, please. This is 3 young people who met with Senator Montgomery about 10 years ago and just shared their experiences with her. She introduced 3 bills, and they have all now officially become law. One of them requires the New York State prison system to place parents in the prison closest to their children, and another one requires law enforcement to safeguard children who parents are arrested in New York State. Next slide, please. Next slide. This is proximities log for celebrating. I want to show that. And next slide. I think we're getting close to the end. Yes, and See Us Support Us, I spoke about that. We are going to be celebrating the Children of Incarcerated Parents Bill of Rights this October. So please follow Susu to learn more about all of that work and support. Next slide. This is Susu in action. Here they are recording a podcast. They did do a podcast on how to support them in schools and college readiness. So if you go to the See Us Support Us Educator Resource Toolkit, you'll find it there. I think we're winding down. There's an art contest, so I would recommend going to the website. You can download the flyer, and that's something that you can put throughout the schools to make sure that children are feeling supported and seen. Next slide. And then also for those of you working at the college level, I'm really thrilled to just share with you about Anna. She's launched the Unlock Project. She partnered with U.S. Dream Academy to and is using their curriculum to have supportive circles on college campuses. And it's something that we're hopeful begins to expand and really inspired by Anna. We are so proud of her. College students can use this QR code to connect with Anna because she also has virtual support available as well. And then there are also some support group models for schools, middle and high school. Whitney Holland spoke about the Joining Forces curriculum and the first webinar in the series, so go back and watch that. And I'm going to turn it over to Diane Wallace Booker to tell you all about the amazing work that she is doing to support students.
Thank you, Allison. That was great. Always a joy to be on the same program with you. We love working with Osborne Association. Even though we are not in New York City, we find lots of other ways to collaborate to support children across the country. So thank you. And thank you, Tiana, for the invitation and to the council for the great work being done here. So I want to start off a little bit by just telling you a little bit about who Dream Academy is and what we do, and then kind of get into some of what we've learned inside of school systems. So we have been around for 26 years. We do provide an after-school program along with really transformative mentoring experiences for young people. Our primary age range is between 2nd through 8th grade. And in the last probably 5 to 7 years, well, I guess more than that now. In the last 10 years, we have really been working on building out a pipeline so that we could support our young people all the way through high school graduation. We are really a relationship-based organization, and we use a developmental relationships model by the Search Institute, and have developed over time our own positive youth development model that is focused in on children who have a parent incarcerated, but we do also serve other young people who are living in pretty high-risk communities. And so how we identify high-risk communities is communities by very specific neighborhoods that have high rates of arrest. These are typically communities that are being over-policed. They also have generally a failing Title I public school. 90% and upwards of the population of kids are families are living at or below the poverty level. And we also are looking at some other data within the community that may give us an indication that parents, kids, and families are being separated due to incarceration. So we sort of specifically, so we're a little bit unique in that we specifically go into communities where we are seeking to find and support young people who have experienced parental incarceration. There's no list of kids, so we have to go by some data that helps us to kind of potentially identify young people. We really are working to, build the next generation of leaders, character-driven, globally minded leaders. And so our program is pretty holistic in that regard. So where are we located for U.S. Dream Academy? It'll be on the next slide. Okay, here's our vision. Thank you. You can go to the next slide. Let me talk a little bit about our impact before we go. The have is not exactly lined up here. So as we have done this work inside of schools with school partners, some of the outcomes that we see on a really regular basis is absolutely a real strong correlation between the kids coming to our program and their school day attendance. We see better school day attendance when kids are connected to our after school program and our mentoring. We see higher college aspirations, meaning that they have identified 4 or more colleges that they are interested in. They have higher aspirations around the kinds of careers, higher meaning like more expansive. We sort of broadened their knowledge around college and careers, and certainly greater optimism for the future. Well over 90% of our kids consistently are reporting that they are engaged in activities that they just couldn't get anywhere else in their community. We have seen in a study that we did in Orlando, and this was a long-term study looking at kids who were with us for 4 or more years, that they had a 92% on-time high school graduation rate. This was in a school district whose graduation rate was around 75%. And also we know that the national average for kids who were growing up in poverty is around 65%. So we were really encouraged to see such a high rate of graduation for students in our program. But that also really is contributed to, a long-term support. And then we see academic success. As we know, across the country and in various different school districts, seeing improvement in academics can be subjective, and grades and scores don't always correlate. So we do like to take a look at, are we seeing some improvement in academics? This is one of the areas where we did see, real significant improvement in some of the standardized test scores. But we don't always just base success on that. There are lots of other factors we're looking at. Our children, one of them is, our children coming to school more frequently? Are they raising their hand? Are they getting their homework turned in, more frequently? All of those are indicators of greater connection to school, which is really important in their long-term success rate. Go to the next slide. So Allison's kind of already gone into so well already, children of incarcerated parents are recognized on sort of the adverse experiences scale. And this particular experience is distinct sort of trauma because of the shame and stigma that's also associated with having a parent incarcerated. And what often happens is some of the behaviors, some of the mental health behaviors, some of the aggression or withdrawal or depression that we sometimes see gets manifested in the school day. And that it can sometimes be disruptive to the school day environment. And because we don't have really strong systems within the schools to support children of incarcerated parents, we end up seeing young people with higher rates of behavioral issues, sometimes suspension, sometimes, high school dropout. And so this is one of the areas we really were designed to try to intervene. We can go to the next slide. Okay. So the next two slides really are about the differences between the experiences that kids may have, whether it's a mother or a father incarcerated. And I do just want to say here, there is no one size fits all. We know that this is data that is kind of far reaching. And some of this data is coming from the American Academies of Science study on mass incarceration. But I wanted to just use these slides to also highlight that while we are starting to, school systems and teachers and principals and administrators are wanting to really understand the experience, that it does vary a lot. It varies a lot by the age of the child. It can vary by their community. It can vary by whether it's a mother or a father incarcerated, whether they were present at the time of the arrest. There's a lot of different factors that impact how young people will go through this experience. So just real quickly, we're going to touch on a few of the things that are different that we see when a mother's incarcerated versus a father. And we're kind of honing in here on educational impacts. So one of the things is a higher risk of dropping out of school in the year that their mother enters jail or prison. And so if this is a kind of a trigger point that we see sometimes, it makes sense that within schools, if we know when this is happening, if we have a supportive environment and we know when this is happening, this is a really good intervention point, because some of the data tells us that in some cases, this can be where we see kids dropping out of school. This is typically for slightly older kids who are in high school. Higher risk of grade retention, so just being held back a year. Also, when a mother is incarcerated, higher risk of foster care placement versus when a father is incarcerated. Typically, kids are staying with the mother and perhaps staying with family. And then, this is again a statistic that I think Allison did a great job of trying to make sure we clearly understand that there is an increased risk potentially for kids who have parents incarcerated, but it's not as great as some of the studies in the past have said. But we do need to be cognizant of the fact that particularly when a mother is incarcerated, that it does create a slightly greater risk for them to be incarcerated themselves in the future. So another key area we need to look out for. The next slide is on paternal incarceration. And again, we see associated with lower GPA, we also see that there's a real increased risk of physical and sexual abuse for daughters when a father is incarcerated. And that's kind of, that data is kind of across the board. When a father is absent, young girls are often, more at risk for that. The data also showed, more weight gain for girls, higher infant mortality rates when a father is incarcerated. And then for boys, aggression and some other negative behaviors coming out, and greater housing instability. And so while they may remain with the mother and not go into foster care, sometimes this is where we see families having to, a mother and kids having to move maybe to multiple locations, staying with family. And sometimes that means they leave the school or the school district. And so they're changing schools multiple times. On the next slide. So I won't go too much into this because Allison's kind of covered this. Without a school and a principal and leadership in a school that is making and helping to create a culture and an environment where these kinds of conversations can happen openly and with support, you will get some of what's on this slide. You will get sometimes some of the bullying happening from one kid to another. We have actually seen it in the past. I want to say a longer time ago, not so much recently, but where teachers and even coaches are using language like you're going to end up just, like your father or something really negative along those lines. We've seen it where it's been unintentional, where the teacher has thought they were trying to be helpful, but unintentionally causing children to feel ashamed. We also have experienced with a lot of teachers where they have their own fear and or personal history with having a family member incarcerated that they haven't quite fully dealt with. And this causes them to be really reluctant to want to engage with kids because there's still so much that they themselves need to unpack. The other real fear is silence. It is actually a lack of response from teachers when a child or a parent discloses this. In silence or lack of response can also speak volumes about the fact that we don't know how to support you and or we're reluctant to support you. The student often feels like they're the only one experiencing this in their school. And we have been in schools in the past where up to 10% of that particular population had a parent incarcerated. We didn't know until we were in there, until we started having the conversations, until kids were joining in our program. But it was really interesting to then talk to young people and hear them say that I really thought I was the only one experiencing this in the school. And when they understand there are other peers dealing with this, that peer support, as Allison said before, is really invaluable, really invaluable. We've talked about this, I won't go into this again, but right, this concern about retaliation or concern of judgment and stigma keeps so many parents and caretakers from coming to the school to talk about this issue. It's the number one thing that we hear, right? Fear of labeling our child, and certainty of what's going to happen when we share this. And I think it's a really key area that as we think that as administrators and districts are thinking about how we begin to create the space that allows parents to, be open and come and talk to them about the challenges. And next slide. So these are the districts that we are in and that we're working with. In some cases, we work directly with the district to go into a school that's been identified as an area, a school that needs most help. In others, we have gone directly to the principal because we've kind of scoped out the area and then have developed that relationship directly. We are inside the school. We provide services every day after school. Academic support, character development, leadership, exposure to lots of new opportunities, field trips, bringing in adult volunteer mentors. But one of the first things we have to do when we come into a school is really be very cognizant about the training and support we do for teachers and the administration. And so it's one of our key partnership goals when we go in is can we do this training with all of your teachers, with all of the administration, so we can begin to sensitize the space and begin to help with the language, begin to help. We often find that the teachers themselves want additional support for them to begin to unpack their own journey in this space, teachers understanding and seeing their own bias. So we don't just pop up in a school and open our doors and say, come to our after school program. We are doing some pre-work to lay the groundwork within a school that begins to create the kind of culture that allows teachers and principals to come. And even in schools where principals have done a really good job of making sure that the school door is open and that there's no judgment. And we see that a lot with some good leadership and principals. Even there, this is an extra layer that really needs to be discussed and trained on so that the principal can continue to open up those doors, but in a more particular way. And so I don't want to suggest that the schools we go into didn't have this before, but because this is a unique space, really needing to make sure that your principals and teachers are getting the kind of unique training. And next slide. think I've talked a little bit about this already, but why we intervene in schools. Key reasons really are it is accessible for students and families. Parents don't have to find a mentor program and then find a tutor and then find a place to take them on exciting field trips and places that think about their future. We pack it all into one and we put it right in their school because they can come to us every day after school. We really love being in the community school models because then we get a lot of additional wraparound services. So, we obviously can't address every issue that comes up. And so when we're in a community schools model is where we really also see the kind of support for kids and parents that is most comprehensive. And then, of course, like I discussed, it's just an issue that's not critically discussed in schools. Um, we have some frameworks in schools for how to deal with kids in challenging situations, kids who are homeless in schools. There's a whole piece in the, the Secondary Act that says, well, how do we handle kids who are homeless? Teachers and principals are trained on that. When a parent is deployed into the military, there's a whole system for that. And we have a framework for what happens. And even military, gets assigned they get assigned to families in certain school districts and they look out for those kids whose parents are currently in deployment. And they may even show up at the school and come to principal meetings. We have a process for what happens when we find out that a kid has been abused, either in school or somewhere else. And we follow a process, but there's just no process that's embedded into our education system that says, what do we do when a parent is incarcerated? And the things I've listed, are also homelessness, abuse, absent parent, even when they're due to, military assignment, um, are all things that we've gotten used to responding to. Unfortunately, we've gotten used to it, but we've got a process for it. And so trying to think about how we create some similar processes within our school, within all of our school systems, so that kids across the country know that school is a place I can come to share this information and expect to get some kind of support, or at least as some framework for that. In our next slide, let's see what we're going to talk about here. I think I've touched on this a little bit. Parents often hesitate. Teachers have mixed reactions, although I tell you in 26 years, when we have come in to do the training, when we really see and understand what teachers are going through, when we do some support to help them also unpack, and principals, people really want to learn how to support, and they want the resources. And even though this can be a tough area sometimes to talk about, we have seen principals, I'm talking about in the school building, respond in such positive ways, abound really wanting to support. It is encouraging. And students feel relieved. They just absolutely feel relieved to know that I can be in the school building, that there is a group here, U.S. Dream Academy, and now my teacher, who open the space to have this really tough conversation, who allow us to not feel the shame and stigma when we're here. And just remember that there's no one size fits all, that we are, that each kid is going through his own experience, but some of the specialized training that we do for staff and our own staff helps us to adjust and make sure we're tailoring our support for kids. Let me just see. This is just a quote from a young person who did talk about her experience of incarceration in class. When she started, she asked how many people had a kid incarcerated, and only a few kids raised their hand. By the end, there were 15 in her class who had raised their hand. And so just again, kind of acknowledging that in some schools and some communities, this is really a prevalent issue that we need to be discussing within the academic place. I'm so glad that this conversation is continuing to happen. Next slide. Talked a bit about this, just no unified approach. Although over 26 years, we have seen so much progress in this space. When we first started this, principals were literally relieved to see us come to their doorstep to say, this is such a challenge in our school, and we just haven't had anybody address it. There's so many more supports now, and I'm really encouraged to see how school districts and schools have taken this on. Obviously, there needs to be a lot more, but I'm just really encouraged over a couple of decades to see the level of change that has occurred, and recognition for the need for people to really have a lot more of the specialized training in this area. Next slide. So I think we're getting right, to the end here. We definitely want to say have some time for Q&A. Again, I just want to really emphasize that when you have a program in your school, like a U.S. Dream Academy or Osborne or any of the other great programs that are doing work, it is really important to take the time to make sure all of the adults who are working in the school are also trained to support this area. And it does come with a lot of compassion. There is a lot of specific coping skills, talking about exposure to trauma. But again, it's not just trauma, it is also the shame and stigma piece that goes along with this. So we do a great training that we call Youth Work is Self-Work, and it really is about us first going deeper inside of our own selves and understanding our own bias, understanding our own challenges that we've experienced, how we dealt with them, reminding ourselves that we were all kids once, and what does it look like now to be a kid, and how do we how do we as adults begin to see kids as leaders? How do we share power with them? How do we challenge them to grow and hold them accountable while caring for them and providing support? We do lots of role playing. We talk about this whole teacher dilemma. We've had many experiences where teachers were afraid of the parent, and the parent's crime. In some cases, and the parent got out. Some cases, there are some legitimate reasons. One case I can remember distinctly when we were in New Jersey, the parent was known to be a gang member. I never confirmed it myself, but that was the reputation. And this particular teacher was very, very concerned about what it would mean to discipline the child in the classroom because she didn't want to upset the parent. She didn't know how to talk about this. And I think after we worked with them and the principal to really kind of help help her balance what may have been legitimate information we didn't even know, but with what needed to happen with the child in the classroom, I think was a really important, part of this work. There are other times when we just are holding irrational fears, and we've got to work together to help ourselves unpack some of where that fear is coming from so that the child doesn't sense that or feel that. And so we do a lot of that work, and we've heard lots of really, interesting stories and experiences. And so it looks different from district to district. And so I think it is really important to make sure we're creating that space for teachers and principals when you decide this is an issue we want to make sure we're supporting our kids. I think that is, let's see, just talking about school-wide changes. Again, what we've also seen when we are in a school and we are addressing this issue, what tends to happen, which I love seeing, is that the school itself just overall becomes better equipped to support all young kids who are dealing with various different challenging life circumstances. And so I do think that it does help, it does support a more school-wide change when you start to kind of tackle some of these bigger issues that are maybe taboo or shame or stigma. It begins to open up the door for a lot of other conversations that also need to happen, and you start to see more of a school-wide change. And that means investing in ongoing training and resources for teachers and admin, and absolutely incorporating youth voices, and real genuine engagement in the planning and the training and the implementation of whatever may happen. When we go into a school, we spend a lot of time up front, not only with teachers and and administrators, but with students, talking about the planning. What do you want to see? What are the challenges you're facing? How do we build a program for you that is addressing these issues? And so with that level of engagement, when we start programming, we have a lot of buy-in in schools because we have taken the time to do a lot of that early work that we hope will not only just impact the kids that come to our program in the afternoon, but start to see more school-wide changes about being able to address a number of issues. Questions? Okay, great. We'll turn it back over to, I think, Tiana or one of their team who's going to facilitate our Q&A.
Thank you both for the phenomenal presentation and the work that you both do. We have a question from Susan Beatty, who says, how do we get U.S. Dream Academy in Oklahoma, where the incarceration rates are some of the highest in the country and education at an all-time low?
Yeah, it's a great question, Susan. I would love to talk more about that. We actually have had several inquiries from folks in Oklahoma about getting some support there. So, we do have an everyday after school program. That is something, we could talk about bringing there, but we also do support in training schools about how to utilize some of the youth development models that we have. So a lot of times they don't have the resources to bring a whole learning center. And so there are things that we can do to at least help build up some of the support within a school system. And in addition to that, we have virtual programs too. And so there are kind of different levels, but Susan would love to, talk with you more about that because it does require, some financial commitments, and we've got to raise the money to get into a school. But we've got other resources that we could possibly help support. And I do know that Oklahoma is one of those states that, the rates of incarceration haven't necessarily gone down like they have in other states like California and Texas, some of the other larger states that have been working on decarcerating. So I'm sure you'll put our contact information in here, Tiana, for anyone who wants to reach out to us, and Susan and whoever else could certainly send us an email.
I want to flag that there are some other virtual supports that are available for those of you that are thinking, I don't have resources in the community. So Project Avery is doing some online kind of mentoring support groups. Over the summer, we have the SIA Support Us Youth team where young people come together virtually to not only think about the messaging and what they want for October SIA Support Us Month to focus on, but it's really an opportunity for them to get that peer support that's so desperately needed. So there's a couple other resources for young people.
Thank you. From Susan Connors, she asks, do you have programs that can be used for incarcerated parents so they can reunify with their child or grandchild? Both of you can answer that.
I can speak to that. So the Osborne Association, we are based in New York. We're a nonprofit. We've been around for 90 some years, and most of our programming are direct services for people who are incarcerated or alternatives to incarceration, and then a lot of reentry support. So we do have a lot of programs in New York to really help parents through the parenting classes inside the state prisons. We also have healthy relationships classes, which is really important to make sure that there's any of the stress and damage that may be happening with the other parent or the other caregivers of the children are addressed to be able to support that reunification when the parent comes home. I think thing that a lot of people don't understand is there are 47,000 legal barriers to people who have a crime of conviction on their record. So even a parent who's coming home from incarceration with the best intentions is met with a lot of barriers. So we really need to think about how best we can support them in being successful so then they're therefore able to parent. A lot of the probation systems don't necessarily have a family-focused probation. And so if you are working with families in any anyway, and there's a probation encouraging that probation officer to think about how best to support a parent's ability to meet their parenting responsibilities, so they're not required to be in some type of program at the same time that they should be picking their child up from school. So again, I think we're reaching out to community-based organizations who are working inside the prisons and jails is a good kind of first step to figure out what types of supports are there to ensure that the child and parent can successfully heal and come back together upon the parent's return.
Thank you.
Yeah, we don't currently have we have a program for high school students that is virtual. It is a 12-week program, and in it addresses some of the reentry component. It's not just about reentry, but there are components in there, and it is a peer group and then facilitated by one of our trained facilitators. And then we do it more one-to-one with families, but we don't have a current kind of reentry program that is expansive, but it meaning like, that we offer just as reentry, we kind of tailor it to the families. But it's definitely a gap, right? It's a gap in the reentry framework that we don't do enough to prepare the caretaker and the child for what reentry means and looks like for themselves and how they also can support their returning loved one.
In 2023, SIA Support is focused on reentry through a child's eyes, and there are a couple of webinars that really talks about how to support young people in that process, because so often the focus is really on the parent coming home and what do they need, and oftentimes the child and the caregiver, single parent in the community's needs aren't necessarily thought of. So that's another place, a resource and a place to start.
All right. Our final question is from Blake McVeigh. Here in Memphis, we're interested in addressing these children and families with our public library children's department. Are you aware of another library that already has such a program? Go ahead, Allison.
Great question. So I'm proud to say the Brooklyn Public Library does a great job of having some supports for those who've been involved in the criminal justice system and their children. We partnered with the Brooklyn Public Library to help them set up a free video visiting program for children and families to be able to connect with and video visit with their parents and some of the upstate prisons, because visiting in person is critical, but being able to have more regular contact in between those regular visits is really helpful. And we also have a book that the library puts out every year called Connections that has it's like 200 pages of a bunch of community-based resources in the greater New York City metropolitan area. So those are some models to look towards. If you're interested in connecting with Brooklyn Public Library, you can feel free to reach out to me and I can get you connected with the right folks. Oh, look at you. You're quick, Nicole. Thank
I
you.
know, right?
Seriously.
You're the greatest.
And there's also some libraries like in Westchester County here in New York, as well as here in New York City. The libraries go into the jails and they've got a library card. And so, I think some libraries are a little involved in this area.
I think they do something similar to it, but in the Berkeley area out in California, they've got a really robust education program there, and I think their libraries are involved similar to what you're describing. It's a great question, a great way to connect children and families to the libraries.
Yeah. So I want to thank everyone for attending all three of this webinar series, and especially this one during Second Chance Act Month to kick off two phenomenal organizations that are on the ground doing the work actively with children affected by parental incarceration. I will be sending a email with a post-event survey, and I will also include both the U.S. Dream Academy's information and Osborne Association's websites for you all to contact them for available services and supports. So thank you all for attending today.